Hello again, Suzy Menneret, Wholesale Advisor and Content Director at MEF. Welcome to you if you've just joined. We've been live for just over an hour and a half, and already we've been hearing a lot of developments in the wholesale industry. We've heard about net APIs. We'll come back to that over the course of today. We've heard about AI just now. We've heard with Emmanuel. We've heard about 5G, which will come up again later on in our sessions today. Certainly, one thing that was interesting from the discussion of Dario and Emmanuel is this skill set and resource element that definitely needs to be looked into, which also would deserve a bit of time, and we certainly at MEF will come back to that later on this year. So we carry on talking about messaging, and so I'm very happy to moderate this next panel, which is called "Does the Downfall of A2P SMS Actually Matter?" So for this particular discussion, I'm very happy to welcome my panelists, and starting with obviously Catalin Badea, who is actually part of Netnumber, the sponsor of this session, and thank you very much for that. Olly Brough. So Olly, welcome. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. If I haven't, then apologies. And Taha and Glyn from Taha from Beem and Glyn from Telefonica. Before we start, if I could just ask yourself to just very quickly introduce yourself to the audience, that would be fantastic. You will do it far better than I can do it. So the floor is yours, starting maybe with Catalin, of course, and then in the order of appearance, Olly, Glyn, and Taha, please.
Sure. So yeah, I'm Catalin Badea, VP of Product Management at Netnumber, based in Germany, and yeah, very happy to be here.
Hello, my name is Olly Brough. I'm SVP of Sales and Marketing at Trusona, yeah, we're an organisation at the centre of the passkey, the new standard that's available natively in iOS and Android devices.
Good morning. So Glyn Povah from Telefonica. So I've been working on digital identity APIs for the last 6 or 7 years. I think now we're seeing maybe the convergence of some of those categories, especially with messaging. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, hi, my name is Taha. I'm the CEO of Beem. We're Africa, Middle East focused communication platform. And working with enterprise and wholesale customers.
So a warm thank you from my side. So the title of this session obviously seems to suggest that we tend to see a downfall in A2P SMS. We've heard also earlier today that it may not be quite the truth. Let's see what happens. I'm first going to address you, Catalin, as obviously you've been the master of ceremony in suggesting and arranging this session with us today. If you could give us a bit of an insight as to why did you pick this topic? What's the background of this, and why did you choose this topic as such?
Sure. So yeah, I realize the title is a little controversial, and that's the purpose of today's conversation, to actually discuss more details about is this actually true, and if yes, what are the consequences? If not, business as usual. But it's my opinion that what were the crossroads. So what started as maybe rumors a few years ago appears to have transformed into a trend that seems to be confirmed by more and more industry players, which is the fact that A2P SMS is no longer growing, at least not the way it used to in the past. And in terms of evidence to that, we all know Nick Lane's excellent reports. The Mobile Square 2023 A2P SMS pricing impact report talks a lot about the A2P SMS market, pricing strategies, and the fact that A2P SMS traffic volumes are flattening or even decreasing in many geographies. Now, I don't think that it's a global trend yet, but it appears to have a certain relationship to geography. So in some geographies, A2P SMS still appears to be on a growing trend. In some others, it might have reached its peak already. It appears to be a dependence on use cases, and I think in general, I see a certain shadow of pessimism in the industry when it comes to A2P SMS. And I think everybody was used to kind of constant growth, that 5 to 6% year on year. It was kind of guaranteed. Now it appears to be a little more nuanced and differentiated. And happy to talk today about reasons, alternatives, and what the industry needs to do going forward.
So yes, so to discuss this controversial debate, I'm going to probably leave the floor to your colleagues and see if they share your views. I heard a few things, maybe some regional differentiation. Is this true, or is this is the full true, or is this business as usual? Let's go probably to first Glyn and Olly. Just before I go to obviously the regional side of things, which will be very interesting to hear from you, Taha. Olly and Glyn, what are your views with regards to that trend? And do you share that?
I mean, I think to a certain extent, I mean, for sure the growth rates are lower than they were before. It is very much a sort of regional basis. So if you look at Western Europe, I think we still see growth in Telefonica markets, and maybe we see fewer challenges like AIT that are in different parts of the world that we don't see so much. With regional and domestic based A2P SMS, and maybe some of the wholesale routes are more challenged for that. But it's true that, of course, if you look on a use case basis, the differences are definitely there. So for sure, there's growth in marketing and alerts and comms for SMS A2P. On the authentication side, I think that's where you see the biggest divergence. It's really big still in UK for A2P one-time passcodes, but actually in Spain and Germany, that use case is very much falling away and going to other methods. So I think if you look at it use case by use case, we can see different trends emerging, but overall, I would say still growing.
Yeah, and I think drilling down onto that, I can't really talk to regional differences. If you break it down by domestic or international, then certainly at the international level, I understand that around about 50% of A2P SMS is historically carried a one-time PIN or one-time passcode. And a lot of that traffic is coming from the big technology platforms, Google, Microsoft, but also the social media platforms. And it's no surprise that the big social media, the big technology platforms, Apple, Google, Microsoft, they are founding members of FIDO, which is behind the passkey standard, and they are actively shifting their customers away from A2P. I think at a domestic level, it is both probably a little bit more less dynamic in the sense that there's a lot more complexity for domestic organisations to shift away from A2P because they, unlike Facebook, I've never rung up customer services at Facebook. But if I have a banking relationship, I want to be able to communicate with them on multiple channels. And certainly that introduces a lot of complexity. I don't think, given that we're in a very political economy, I think there's been an oven-ready solution for many of the big international platforms to move across to the new authentication technology. But for domestic businesses that operate multiple channels, there isn't an oven-ready solution for shifting away from A2P. And I think that's the big challenge to get their arms around that if they want to be able to rescue that traffic.
Interesting. So authentication will come to, and also other obviously other OTTs, OTTs coming into that space, and other services coming on top, and how that affects the A2P messaging piece. But before we come to that, I would like to give the floor to Taha, and I'm sure in Africa you see different things. I would really like to hear also if you from an international scene as well, do you see differences? I mean, we also heard earlier from a different panel that there are specific pricing applied in Africa that still suggests that, you know, pricing in some areas is quite high. Does that damage also the A2P SMS business to some extent? Really eager to see what your views are from with your sort of regional and, you know, African hat, certainly.
Yeah, no, thank you, Suzy. So there's definitely some differences. We're not seeing the declines in growth as yet. So there's definitely volume growth in volumes and business overall, because we're in growing markets and there's more digital transformation and more adoption of these solutions for the first time, I would say. So SMS and some of these channels are still the go-to mediums there. That being said, every operator on the continent, in essence, has set up a SMS firewall and has segregated, international and domestic traffic. So there's definitely, very big discrepancy in pricing, and we're seeing some kind of trends in terms of international brands being definitely getting tired of the exorbitant pricing to some extent, right? So we do see some declines, or we foresee some declines to come on that side. But on the domestic side, volumes are still growing because of the trends that we spoke about. And also remember that most of the continent, across Africa and parts of the Middle East, smartphone penetration is not yet, at the levels that they are in developed markets, right? So on average, it's only maybe 30-40% that have a smartphone. So the universal mediums of communication still have to come back to messaging, in essence, and you can't switch. There's no other good alternatives at this point.
So good growth still ahead in specific regions. When we prepared this panel, I mean, there was a lot of discussions around authentication and how authentication, why and how authentication can be a challenge in the messaging space. Catalin, what are your views? I guess you probably had this in mind when you prepared this panel as well, when you put this topic forward to us as well. What are your views as to how and why authentication is really a core topic in the A2P SMS space? And obviously, my other colleagues feel free to react, but it would be very interesting to have a bit of a discussion around that piece.
Yeah, absolutely. So Olly already mentioned this. A very important part of the A2P SMS volumes was related to one-time passwords or is still related to A2P passwords for two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication, I don't have to preach to the converted here, but I think pretty much all the enterprises see this as a good practice to secure user accounts, and it so happened that SMS is a ubiquitous channel to implement this technique. So definitely an important use case. And if we're looking at in particular the international market, the international A2P SMS market, it tends to be dominated by probably a handful of very large A2P SMS senders whose names I will not mention here, but I think everybody in the messaging space kind of knows who they are. And for them, it's obviously important to keep the user's account secure. But on the other hand, it's also important to do this in a way that's not damaging to them. And what I mean by that is there are definitely increased concerns on fraud in messaging. Again, AIT definitely had a big took the headlines, and it had a big impact on how many companies see two-factor authentication, but then also the growth of alternative channels. There are many ways now, many more ways than we used to have in the past. And in particular, when looking at the user experience, some of these new alternative ways are superior. So I think the authentication use case continues to be a very important one. I think what's shifting is the way of doing it. So kind of, based on fraud concerns and price increases, on one hand, and also driven by innovation and alternative ways of performing authentication, I think there is this shift in how, in particular, like I said, some of the large brands are choosing to authenticate their users.
Yeah. I think, Olly, when we did discuss this prior to this session, you had a strong word for this. You said, you almost said it's a driver away.
It is, but I mean, if I can just maybe drill into a bit more detail on that, is so as we said earlier, I think a lot of the shift is starting to happen more quickly at an international level. And just to recap on a point I made earlier, and linking to what Catalin said, is and I will mention it. If I'm Facebook, then ultimately I really only communicate with my customers in a single channel, which is the Facebook app, right? So sure, they're a big complex business, but actually the way that they communicate with their customers is very sort of single line. And therefore, it's much easier for them to be able to implement new sort of technology features that can shift them away from reliance upon OTP. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, Apple, Google, Microsoft, they have been behind a lot of the driving the initiative for these new standards. At a domestic level, I think probably a lot of the vendors and the telcos offering you mobile signals and data signals and so forth are sometimes probably a bit confused as to why, given there's a lot of complaints around, I don't know, AIT, but also if you're a security practitioner, then you look at OTP, it's a very, very weak form of authentication that can be intercepted and reused. And if you talk to CISOs, then they will universally say that they do not feel confident with OTP, but they do not feel they're being offered a viable alternative. And people maybe will say, well, I've got a wonderful silent messaging authentication solution, or I've got a passkey solution. You can use that. Well, it's not that simple. The wonderful thing about messaging is that it is universal, and especially SMS as well. And I think RCS, coming on to RCS in time, I think there's huge opportunity there, given that it provides much more surety around the verified sender, and it's a lot more sort of graphical, provides better information and the like. So the point here is that at a domestic level, as I mentioned earlier, domestic organizations, they have more channels, they're more complex in that sense, and they have to serve in these different channels. And the wonderful thing about messaging is I send you a message to your phone number, whatever that might be, it could be OTT or it could be SMS, you'll get it, and then I can action something for you. And from a user perspective, it's even better because I don't ever need to remember anything. Every time I want to sign on or do something, you just send me the message, and the onus is on you, the brand, to send me something, and I then tap it or open it or copy and paste it somewhere, and off we go. So what I think we've got to cling on to is that the messaging side of it, be it SMS, RCS, or WhatsApp, or whatever it might be, is a really, really wonderful thing, and it works really well. And IT folk love it as well, because you don't have to deeply embed it into your systems and processes. The bit that is broken is the OTP, and I think it's really important to split that out. And I think at the moment, the industry where we are is coming forward with, and I'm guilty of that as well, is coming forward saying, hey, look, here it is, I've got a passkey, that'll solve all your problems, let's shift away from OTP. Or here it is, I've got silent mobile authentication, or here it is, I've got risk signals. That's not a universal solution, and what these organizations are looking for is something that they can shift over to without huge change, that still has that beautiful experience for.
Yeah, very interesting, this comment about OTP being a bit of a challenge, but also if I draw a line on what you've just mentioned, the customer experience and the journey that they need to we need to secure for them when using those channels. Maybe Glyn, you could probably, from a Telefonica perspective, say a few words on this. Surely, I'm sure that this is also one of the topics that Telefonica is looking into.
Absolutely, Suzy. So we've been looking into this for quite a while now, and I think I echo and agree with all of Olly's comments. There's definitely an evolution in the marketplace, especially in the security practitioner space, where they are looking to improve security and defend against, the SMS OTP situation, where customers are just unfortunately handing over those one-time passcodes to fraudsters when the fraudsters ask for them. So that is the weakness that Olly identified. But, and there are alternative solutions. They don't have the ubiquity that we have today. So I think there's a role for orchestration players to actually start to create orchestration journeys that best meet the brand's needs and the customer's needs in any given scenario, whether that's, something on a smartphone or a feature phone. But I would say, from a general or security perspective, there's plenty of brands out there that are not using any kind of authentication, right? Any 2FA. And that's a really bad situation. So I think, retail banking and payments, that's quite well covered now. But if you look at kind of stored value accounts, whether that's, British Airways or other airlines or hotels, where people store huge amounts of points, sometimes with huge amounts of value, those are being very widely targeted now. The crypto accounts, still many of them have poor or no 2FA. So I think that there's plenty of opportunities, even, for messaging-based solutions. And of course, as operators, we've been promoting quite heavily our number verify solution, which is a seamless authentication way of using a phone number. So keeping the familiarity with phone number, but doing that possession-based authentication in the background through the network. And that's one of the lead APIs we have in our Open Gateway initiative, which we're promoting very strongly. But I think back to Olly's point, it will be a mix of solutions. Messaging and SMS especially will still be there for a while. I'm quite excited about the verified sender feature in RCS and RBM, and I think we'll hopefully see that really bringing trust back to messaging, especially for some of these use cases where it's really essential.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll come back to that mix of solutions. I think it's really interesting. And just before that, I like to give the floor to Taha, really, to see if, from an OTP, sorry, and from a security perspective, do you see the same things happening in your area? And what about that brand, what's going on with regards to brands in your area and the customer journey?
Yeah, like I said, so fragmentation is a big challenge because there's just so many markets, each with their own regulators and each operator changing the rules. So that for brands and for aggregators alike, it's just a nightmare in terms of keeping up with, what is going to work, what is allowed, what is not allowed, how is my customer really going to suffer, at the end of this, right? So those are some of the challenges at the moment, and it's just getting worse. And so we need a better solution, definitely. We've been experimenting with, for particular brands, let's say using two-way SMS or USSD as alternative channels for verifying numbers, because those are more still traditional in the sense that are universal, will work across devices, but have less of the fragmentation and challenges and the fraud instances that we're seeing on A2P SMS. And definitely in our region, we're increasingly seeing a lot of fraud, especially on mobile money, mobile banking, which is very prevalent across the region.
Thank you very much. So there's a lot of areas to be very conscious about and work on. I'm conscious of time. We only have 5 minutes. It just goes so quick, and I have the feeling we've only tackled half of what we wanted to say. But looking at other positive, on the positive sides. I mean, obviously, the Catalin, when you brought up this topic, you foresaw, opportunities. We talked about mixed solutions. What are the what opportunities, what bright sides do you see in the industry to move forward?
Yeah, two things I would say. So clearly there is a shift in how brands do certain things, and in particular authentication, as we discussed today. So I think for everyone involved in supporting brands with authentication use cases, just doing the same old and sticking to A2P SMS is probably not a good idea. So we talked about some of the innovative solutions today. So one of my points here would be look at what's available, look at what this new innovation is about, test some of those solutions, work with your customers on POCs, and then choose out of the spectrum of new and upcoming solutions what's the best mix to support your brand customers with this type of use cases. The other thing that I would say, and Glyn touched on this, SMS is still not fully used by all brands and enterprises out there, and I think it's not only a question of making the technology more accessible and educating even smaller brands that it's a useful tool. It's also a question of use cases. Maybe authentication use cases will not be supported so much by A2P SMS in the future, but there are use cases where messaging, SMS or RCS or other messaging types are pretty well suited. For example, conversational commerce. In some markets, SMS is your A2P SMS inbox is typically just one-time passwords. Some other markets have a very robust, conversational commerce ecosystem, and maybe it's the pricing model that's at fault, because A2P SMS tends to be quite expensive in some markets. If you have to send 5, 10, 15 messages for a transaction, it becomes expensive. But I think that's a really interesting use case, and in particular in the world of RCS and some of the new pricing models, like session based instead of per message. This could be another opportunity in our space.
Thank you very much, Catalin. I mean, we only have 2 minutes, so maybe I'll ask a few words to Glyn, Olly, and Taha. What would be your positive note or recommendation as to what should be the focus moving forward?
I'll have a go at that if you like. I think I think my simple recommendation is, I think I mentioned this before, is coming from a tech background, we've a software background. I've always been taught to focus on the problem you're solving, but when being really specific to that. And I think that's from a perspective of authentication. I think the opportunity for messaging is to solve specific fraud issues, very specific fraud issues. So, for example, the interception of one-time pins on a sort of one-by-one basis. So how can you do that for the remote channel? How can you do that for digital channels? And all the answers, and I think the answers spring out of really understanding the detail in the fraud practice. And then suddenly the light bulb goes on, and actually there's an opportunity to deliver a messaging-based solution that will sustain the industry long term, rather than losing all revenues from OTP.
Thank you. Glyn, one word of recommendation you could have.
Sure, I'll try and keep it super simple. I think for me it's all about use cases, and it always has been about use cases. And we get very excited in our industry about the product that we have, and that everyone should be using the product that we have. But actually, if you drill down to the individual use cases, we've got more tools in our toolbox than ever before. We've got RCS, RBM. We've got Number Verify. We've got some additional APIs coming as part of the Open Gateway Initiative and Kamara, things like location, and those have data privacy challenges. But if we can talk to customers in their own language about their own use cases and educate them on the tools we have in our toolbox, I think that's the way to grow, by talking customers in their language, understanding their needs and their problems that they need to solve.
Thank you so much, Glyn. Very, very last word from you, Taha. I know we're very short.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with what Olly and Glyn said. I have a tech background as well. We need to focus on first principles and what are the challenges. I think we're definitely betting a lot on chat, because particularly WhatsApp on the continent, because that's what's universal and has more than 90% uptake for smartphone users. RCS is still not as prevalent. I think there's only a couple of markets there, so still more fragmentation on that side. But I think definitely combination of use cases, industry-specific solutions for specific verticals, and these new channels Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, that's been very short. It's been a very interesting conversation. I've got plenty more questions to ask, so we'll probably have to do that one more time again. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Catalin and Netnumber, for sponsoring this session, and talk to you very soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.